Well, good evening everyone and welcome to Contours, where we explore aspects of faith and culture, and our guest tonight is Keith Mascord. So welcome, Keith.
Thank you.
Now, Keith, you wear a few hats. You've been a chaplain, a probation officer, a lecturer, a school teacher, an author. What's your sort of self-identity, or if someone just asks you briefly who you are, how do you sort of respond to that?
Yeah, well, I think I see myself not in terms of the roles that I've assumed, but just as a person, and I don't know, just a optimistic, generous, happy Christian who over a period of a lifetime has had the privilege of teaching, doing study, teaching again, pastoral work. So yeah, in terms of identity, just Keith really. Keith.
And we've talked about contour lines, so you strike me as a person who's interested in looking and exploring things. That comes out in your book.
Yeah.
So does this idea of contours sort of resonate with you?
I like it very much. It's an excellent idea, contours, and an excellent name for a group. So I need to say that, don't I?
You do, yeah.
Really,
yep.
The interview's pretty much terminated if I don't like contours. Yeah. But I do like the idea of contours and the idea of not knowing how your life's going to go. So the idea of windy paths is picked up in the cover.
Yeah, well, let's have a look at the cover. I mean, I'm tempted to sort of say what I think's in the book.
I do. Maybe others might say, what do you think when you see that picture?
I like the idea of the tide coming and going, and it's probably a bit different every time, and it's a little bit meandering.
Yeah, it is a tidal river. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you had a particular reason for picking that?
Well, what do other people think? What comes to mind when you see the river?
Gastrointestinal tract.
Oh, really? You're a doctor?
There's the notion of liminality, if you're familiar with that term.
If we're not familiar with that term.
Liminality is the in-between spaces. It's not solid, it changes.
Okay.
That sort of river may be blocked off sometimes, or be open to the sea sometimes. Yeah. The pathways would change with storms. Yeah. So there's a unpredictability and it's not solid. It's changing. It fluctuates.
Kind of like the idea of contours, which can change with landslides and roads and paths that take you in different ways. So yeah, I think that's true. There's a certain unpredictability and lack of solidness about the course of the river. What about other people?
It's very wild. There's no real sign of man taking control of that environment.
Yeah.
So there's some particular things in there?
For me, I looked for a photo that would give the idea of a restless journey, but a journey that was going somewhere, and the idea of going to the ocean. Here's a journey that has a destination, and I think all true journeys ultimately lead to God. So the Augustinian quest, the heart is restless till it finds its rest in God. That's the idea of that's the major idea that as you seek to understand the truth, since God is truth, you're moving either towards or away from God. And the journey has a culmination.
Let's explore some of that journey for you, a restless place. So not quite born in Newcastle, but we'll come to that, but you do have some origins in Newcastle?
Yeah. My dad was born in Catherine Hill Bay, which is, you know where it is? Yeah. Just outside of Swansea on the coast. His dad was a coal miner, and he was a great cricketer, my dad. I was a great disappointment, really, because although he tutored me well and even built a cricket pitch in the backyard, it came to our attention eventually after so much tutoring and all the best of tutoring. And Dad was convinced that had he been tutored well enough, he would have played for Australia. Well, as an 18-year-old, he played in Country Week, and he was a prolific scorer and actually topped the averages on the lower Clarence as a 60-year-old. So very talented cricketer he was. But I've got a problem with my eyesight. I can't pick a swinging ball. So he taught me the most impeccable defence. So I'd either go in and open and make very few runs and stay there forever, or I'd come right down the list. Anyway, that's too much of a story really, but he was born in Catherine Hill Bay. But when the war came, he signed up and trained in the army. Then towards the end of the war, transferred to the Air Force, met my mum in training in Claresholm, Alberta, Canada. And that's why I have a slight accent. It is Canadian. So that's okay. So I do have some connection to Newcastle. And my great mate, Ken Fraser.
Also known as Kenny Fraser in the book.
Yeah, Kenny Fraser, who went to school with me at Swansea High School. And we were friends when I first came from Canada to live here. We lived in Swansea.
Yeah, it's worth buying the book to read. Just some stories of.
Oh, Ken, really? They're really some of the highlights. Actually, some of the early highlights to hear about Ken Fraser in Newcastle. Yeah, that's right.
Now, you've mentioned your mother being Canadian. So, in your life, you've were born in Canada, came to Australia, went back, and came back a bit. What's been some of the legacy of living in two multiple places?
I think I learned to travel. So the book has a sort of journey motif, and all my life I've travelled. So I grew up in a very large Bible college, which trained people for missionary service, and so I grew up in a very strong Christian community. But then when we came to Australia, we just lived in the community, went to a small Methodist church, and so when we moved from Canada to Australia, from the hothouse of a wonderful nurturing in North American fundamentalism, to living kind of in a secular world. So I think the journeying and also the variety of experiences has made me comfortable in almost any setting. I think, and
you do talk in there about you getting good experiences being an outsider because of these.
Yeah, well, you're always an outsider when you first arrive somewhere, aren't you? So and when we moved back to Canada the second time, we lived downtown. So we didn't live in the Bible Institute, we lived downtown. And I went to the public school. But then on Sundays, we'd wander back down to the big prairie tabernacle. So, living in two lives, living in two types of worlds, even as a youngster. So I was an outsider and an insider. So I learnt to be an outsider, insider, outsider. Yeah.
What's that like being an outsider? Does that mean you can't really belong somewhere, or not necessarily?
I think I tended to make the outside the inside. Partly because I'm gregarious and outgoing. Wherever I've been, you adapt to the ways. And there's a story in the book of me learning to swear, and this was downtown Three Hills, Alberta. So all my friends would swear, and I could swear and swear and swear. And the thing that pulled me up was that one day I said, "Jesus Christ." Those words were no sooner out of my mouth, and I realised that I was, taking in vain the name of the person I loved more than anyone, and stopped swearing that day. So the ability to be able to fit in. I've always been able to do that.
Because you do talk at times about wanting to be popular. Do you think that was a desire to belong or to be someone you weren't, perhaps?
Oh, yeah, perhaps. Yeah, there could be a certain. I guess it was more confidence. I was confident enough to think I would be, and sometimes was.
Now, Christian community is featured in your life. So you had the Prairie Bible Institute experience of living there and downtown. But at Moore College as a student and then faculty. So has that been a big feature of your life, community?
Community living. Yeah, I guess so. I mean, there's a lot of things happen between Three Hills and Moore College. So there's Moore College for many years wanted its students to live within community. So it was very much communitarian living. So there was some similarity. I don't know whether at the time I saw the similarity between PBI and Moore College, but the idea of being enculturated within a group and within a group where you're not simply doing academic work, but you're living with each other is potent and dangerous. Dangerous because potent, I think. Yeah.
So growing up in a Christian family and I gather relatively conservative in a sense. Then you talk about going to Armidale University as being a new era in your life for a whole lot of reasons. Can you tell us about some of those new things or what impact that whole Armidale University experience had on your life?
It was very impactful. One, I very quickly met my future wife, so that was a huge thing in my second year. But when I
a future wife, that's an interesting concept.
At that stage she was my future wife.
Yeah.
She's now my present wife.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. So it was significant that way. It was also significant because I realised as a 18-year-old, and perhaps even earlier, that I had been so winningly and successfully nurtured into Christian faith that's all I knew. I was as convinced of the truth of my Christian faith as anyone could be as a youngster. And Kenny and I, in third form, took a whole busload of people to the Billy Graham crusade. So we were the most ardent and enthusiastic of Christians you could imagine. Perhaps slightly objectionable in some ways, but we loved God, we loved Jesus, and we loved the faith. But when I went to university, I thought, well, one, I wanted to become a minister, and I also, and then I asked the question, if I'm going to be a pastor or a teacher or a preacher, the best preparation would be to look at the very best reasons not to be a Christian. So I decided to study philosophy and to subject my faith to critical scrutiny, which I continue to do and always want to do. So I went to uni and just took a step back for a while from. I was still fairly heavily involved in the Christian Union and the Anglican Society there, but I took a step back to rethink through my faith. But I also encountered it at university. That's significant. Meeting my wife's significant, but the third most significant thing was to meet a number of very able and winningly godly exemplars of evangelical Anglicanism.
And that was new for you?
That was new. So I'd come from a Methodist background, Arminian as opposed to Calvinist, pre-millennial dispensational. Does that mean anything to you? You know, Jesus is coming back and then there's going to be 1,000-year reign on earth. And he might come before the tribulation or after the tribulation. So, did you ever watch With God on My Side, with Andrew Denton show, where he goes to a did you see that? Did you see that movie? No one's seen it.
He goes to a convention.
He goes to a convention in the US, and you meet all these, I guess to us, very kind of wacko Christians. Yeah, exactly. They seem wacko to us. Well, they didn't seem wacko to me because that was my nurturing. I was nurtured in all that, so it wouldn't have seemed. So encountering Anglicanism and a prayer book and liturgical worship. You know, liturgical worship is where you have responses. I used to have to. In my first year of uni, I had to escape to go into town to the local Baptist church to get some sort of ecclesiastical sanity because I wasn't used to Anglicanism at all, but it was low church evangelical Anglicanism. And the first chaplain, Maurice Bettridge, ended up being the principal of Ridley College in Melbourne. And then the next one was Tony Doran, the most impressive person I've ever met. He had a PhD in mathematics from a German university, just brilliant man. Had he lived, perhaps would have been, almost certainly he would have either been principal of Moore College or Archbishop of Sydney. So really incredibly gifted, wonderful, humble.
You mentioned in the book, I think it might have been a chaplain, Kevin Giles.
Kevin Giles was the fourth.
And you describe him as a restless person.
Yeah, he was restless.
And the title of your book is A Restless Faith.
Yeah, that's right. Well, he was. And he was in favour of women preaching and becoming pastors and teachers and heads of churches, and I thought that was just pathetic. I really, a lot of people left. People left the church and left the. This was the Anglican.
This is
chapel.
in the 70s.
Yeah. He was far too radical for us. Really, and he was restless. Yeah.
But that must have left an impression on you too.
Oh, it only just made me more ardently anti-women's ordination. Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, it didn't. I didn't, wasn't persuaded at all. I do think differently now, but.
So from university, you did some high school teaching. You had some experiences in country towns, but you mentioned earlier about becoming a minister. So you went to Moore College to train.
Yeah, when I was at university, we had 3 out of the 4 chaplains had been trained at Moore College, and also we used to go to beach missions, and most of the speakers who were there were Moore College trained, and I just loved hearing. They were able to open the Bible in a way that I'd never encountered previously. And so I was just totally won. So even though my background was Methodist, and even though when I was teaching in Hay in southwest New South Wales, and we attended a uniting church, I wanted to go. The only college I wanted to go to was Moore College.
And so your time there, did that meet the ideas that you thought?
I loved Moore College. Yeah, I loved it. Who else trained at Moore College? Greg's been there.
Fiona?
Fiona, of course, yeah. It certainly met. I loved it. It was like I wrote to a friend after who followed me into college a year or two later and described first year as an all-year house party. I just loved it. So.
Yeah. Then your initial ministry experiences took you into some country towns, Weewar and up at Tamworth.
Tamworth first and then Weewar.
Yeah, so you seem to, or what impact did those country experiences have on your thinking and living a Christian faith?
I think the watershed in my thinking came after Weewar, but I guess some people can accuse Moore College graduates of arrogance. And I think I probably was. Because you think you've come from the best college in the world, you think you know the Bible better than anyone, you've done 4 years there, you're kind of the world, you're an expert.
Where do you think those attitudes or ethos comes from?
Oh, I think most people think their college is the best, and most people think their experience of church is the best. I just think it's human nature, really. And any experience can be quite... any experience at theological college can be quite formative. So I went out into ministry. I always wanted to be a minister, and I went out into ministry thinking I'd arrived in heaven, in the sense of it wasn't really heaven at all, but I mean, it was like this was everything I'd trained for. This was everything I wanted to do. I had no other idea but to do Christian ministry forever, until I dropped. And I also believed that if you didn't believe the Christian gospel, then you were either stupid or immoral. So I went into, not stupid or immoral, but you know what I mean. In other words, if I had the chance to be able to persuade you of the truth of the Christian gospel, I reckon I could do it. And if you resisted the strong arguments I could mount, then you were resisting the truth and, be it on your own head type of thing. So I guess that's both arrogance but also enthusiasm, you know what I mean? Like, it's hard to fault that. And I don't think I was an arrogant person by nature.
It seems that towards the end of your time in the country, there was some, we don't need to go into details, but there was some fairly tragic events, and you conducted a number of funerals under fairly tragic circumstances. They had some sort of an impact on your thinking? Or questioning?
Yeah, well, I guess I've always been a questioner, and some of the experiences of tragic death were horrific and inexplicable, hard to understand. Like, I'll give you just one of a number of examples. Someone I just got to know who lived on a farm outside of Pilliga, in the Pilliga Scrub. A young family, husband, wife, and 2 daughters, 2 lovely daughters, and a 4-year-old son. And they were trying to make a living on the land and finding it tough. One day, the father came home from working, drove his truck to the shed to get something, didn't realise his 4-year-old son, Eric, was on his little push bike, followed his dad to the shed. His dad jumped in the truck, backed over him and killed him. So that was horrendous, and one of the harder funerals that I've taken. But then 11 months later, Eric's elder sister was killed in a freakish car accident where she was thrown from a car and killed because she wasn't wearing her seatbelt. Had she been wearing her seatbelt 12 months earlier, she would have been killed. She was saved because she wasn't in a seatbelt. So 12 months later, she wasn't in a seatbelt and she was thrown to her death. And I spoke at her funeral. So, I mean, I don't think those tragic deaths kind of had me questioning God more than anyone would, more than you would if you were in that situation. But that is a question, isn't it? It's kind of almost the question to ask. It's the question that everyone asks of their faith, I think, if you're sensitive and if you've experienced suffering or come across suffering. Why does God allow such horrendous suffering, not just in this world, but projected into the next? It's a hard one to answer, and I mean, I used to teach the problem of evil and suffering at college, and I think the strongest take-home message for the students were don't try to give trite answers to the problem, and certainly don't try to come up with trite answers to the problem in a pastoral situation, because one, your answer is unlikely to be sufficient anyway, and it's even going to be less sufficient in the context of tragedy and death. When you don't give trite answers, you just listen. So in that sense, hugely influential. I don't think it dented my faith any more than it would anyone, I think.
Okay. And in the midst of that, then you're sort of a little bit unexpectedly transplanted back into inner city Sydney, and you're lecturing at Moore College.
Yeah.
So you're in a different role there. And how many years were you doing that for?
10 years full-time, 5 years part-time.
Yeah. So what was that like then, to be in a teaching role rather than...
Oh, it was good fun. I'd trained as a teacher, so I was a high school teacher, and I really enjoyed it. I mean, what year were you there, Greg?
Started in 95.
95, yeah. I started in 92, so I was fresh from the bush, and green as green can be. So by 95, I probably knew a little bit, and by 2000, a bit more, So, but it was a wonderful privilege because I finished my master's degree and then started the doctorate, which I finished when I was there. So, yeah, hugely privileged. You teach for 3.5 years, then you have 6 months study leave. That's sabbatical. I mean, how good's that?
Yeah.
So no, it's fantastic.
You conducted a survey over a number of years with, I think, your first year students, and it showed that those who had been brought up in a Christian environment later in life were less likely to doubt.
To doubt, yeah.
Did that surprise you?
Well, no, it's an interesting thing, isn't it? Every year for most of those 10, well, probably every year for most of those 15 years, I had a Philosophy 3 class and had a questionnaire where I asked people, do you doubt your Christian beliefs? And every year, without fail, the results came. I'd also ask them, when did you become a Christian? Were your parents Christians? So were you nurtured in a Christian environment? And when did you come to Christian faith? So basically it was childhood, in your adolescence or adulthood. So, with exceptions, those who were nurtured from youth in a Christian environment were less likely to doubt. Those who became Christian in their teenage years, more likely. Those who came to faith later with parents who weren't Christian were more likely to doubt. I mean, it kind of makes sense in a way, doesn't it? But for me, according to that sort of survey, I should never have had doubts. But I did all my life, so I was an oddbod perhaps.
And could you be open about that, or was that something that you sort of kept a bit...
Me? Oh, I think so. I never felt I had to hide. No, I don't think I had to hide.
As part of your research, one of your sabbaticals, you studied under a fellow called Alvin Plantinga, his work, and you actually met him and went to the church that he went to. But there was a bit of unsettling things in that. Yeah. For you, could you tell us about it?
Alvin Plantinga is an American Christian philosopher, one of the world's best, and his area of study is epistemology, which is the study of knowledge, how you know what you know, and and he actually read and critiqued the 3 major chapters that were critical of him, which is kind of really nice. It's funny he didn't agree with me. Of course. But he, without going into too much detail, and maybe you'll have to read the book, but for the very first time in my life I came across an idea which I think kind of shook me, and I think probably it's true. He believed, his belief, I'll try to make it as simple as possible, is he believes, his idea, his theory was that people come to belief in God and come to believe the Christian gospel to be true in a non-inductive way, not generally because of arguments, but in a very much more direct and spontaneous way. So you just, as he would say, you observe the beauty of nature, and the idea forms in your head that God exists. So you don't necessarily need arguments and evidence. So that's a little different to how I'd grown up thinking. But more disturbing still, he believed that if you simply depended upon the arguments for God or for the truth of the Christian gospel, the most rational thing to do would be to be agnostic. So if you're just depending on arguments, he thinks that if you line up all the arguments in favour of God's existence and all the arguments against God's existence, and you sort of weigh them all up and take them all into account, he thinks his conclusion is that the existence of God is slightly more probable than not. And if something's slightly more probable than not, it wouldn't be unreasonable to think that God doesn't exist. In fact, it'd be reasonable to be agnostic. Think, well, I think God exists, but I'm not sure. And then in terms of the Christian gospel, even more radically, he argued that if you take historical methodology, even if you assume the existence of God, if you examine all the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus and for the truth of the Christian gospel, once again, on the basis of arguments and evidence, it's not so strong as to compel belief. In fact, the rational thing to be would be to not believe. So, I mean, how does that strike you? Does that strike you as threatening? It was threatening for me. It was threatening for me. Because I'd gone to WeWar thinking that if you gave me enough time and people were of a mind to believe through the work of the Holy Spirit, that I could provide them with more than adequate reasons and to believe the Christian gospel, and they'd be converted through that kind of rational approach.
So how did you respond as a threatened person?
Oh, well, thought about it really, and over time have kind of wondered what is the implication of the fact that it's not unreasonable to not believe. What does that mean? It kind of, I think, threw me back to thinking that the actual beliefs that we hold maybe aren't so important as we might have thought, and that how we live might be more important than what we think sometimes. So
some of those beliefs for you, and using this as an example, we might want to explore, is as time went on, and you had earlier, you said from your background, opposed, say, move to ordain women, and yet you were the guest speaker at the 20th anniversary of that movement.
Yeah, that's true.
So what sort of things happened within you or on you to cause you to rethink issues like that?
Yeah.
And you might want to nominate some of those issues.
Oh, well, yeah, that's true. Like when I was after studying at Moore College as an undergraduate, I went, as you know, to Tamworth and then to WeWar. And at the time, the Diocese of Armidale was debating the ordination of women to the diaconate, not to the priesthood, but through the diaconate. So I was one of the speakers against, and arguing the case kind of against. We can maybe, people might want to pursue any of this in question time, but two significant things have happened over time. It's taken a little while. One, I think the case against the ordination of women is not as strong as I once thought. So if you just go back to the relevant verses and work out the implications of what Paul or other New Testament writers are saying, I don't think the exegetical case is as strong. It really depends where you start. You might start with Timothy and then you make other things sort of fit into an interpretation of Timothy, and then you go elsewhere and fit the evidence into that. So one, I don't think the exegesis is as strong. And Scott Higgins, who was here a month or so ago, last month, has written some really good papers on that. So exegetically, I think the case is not so strong. But if you take a step back from exegesis to what's called hermeneutics, which is how you read and understand, or how you approach the Bible generally, in terms of how you might interpret what's said there, the case is even weaker, I think.
So as you changed within yourself views that you held, how did others respond to that, or did you feel like you didn't belong in that environment, or you had a role in that environment?
I've never felt that I haven't had a role. In fact, I'm often at Moore College even today. And in this book, it's worth saying various of the chapters, some of which come to conclusions that are different to what some of my former and past colleagues have come to. They've read the chapters and critiqued it. So, I've never stopped engagement, even with people that I differ with. And I think it's interesting. Tony Doran, who died of asbestos-related cancer back in 1983, I coffee with his son, Michael Doran, every month or so, and he said when he read the book, he says, "I don't agree with everything you say, Keith, but I see that what you're saying is, even where we disagree with each other as Christians, let's keep dialoguing. Let's continue the respectful dialogue around things." And so with the issue of women's ministry and the ordination of women, some people, I think, would be shocked that I have a different view, but most people that I've had to deal with simply say beg to differ, or we have robust discussions. So I grew up. My dad encouraged me to discuss, and that's what I do. If you got to know me, I love having coffee. People who've disagreed with me say, "Come and have a coffee." So we have a coffee. So no, I don't think I've ever felt. I have never felt really on the outer simply because I had different points of view. I've just had simply have different points of view.
Yeah. And it seems with your father, theologically, you had quite different views, but you enjoyed that modelling of dialoguing. Yeah. And your wife was quite shocked when she first came across that. Your future wife was quite shocked.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Well, my dad loves debating, so he's died. But people would come, including Ken, who was telling me earlier that Ken encountered my dad as asking his opinion on what do you think about this verse, and what do you think about that verse, and what's your opinion about this, So if you came to visit the Mascord house, you'd be interrogated as to what your opinion on the latest theological idea was. So my dad was not a great listener, unfortunately, but he loved to debate. So that's how I coped. You see, I spent my life debating theology with him. And he was shocked that when I became a Calvinist and gave up my Arminianism, and I've got some problems with Calvinism now, but he was shocked and kind of dismayed, and he said, Keith, you don't think that, do you? And he'd pull out all his verses and say, that's not right. But we just had we had the best of fun. And my wife was kind of shocked by it, because she grew up in a house where you weren't allowed to argue with your parents. But for me, it was a game. It was the way I related to my dad.
And it seems you haven't held back at times. Example, you've written open letters to the Anglican diocese in Sydney about some things that you were concerned about, and yet you don't seem to have done that in an over-provocative way, but a constructive way from my reader. But how have people responded to that when you've been fairly open in a fairly heavy critique of ethos and theology?
Yeah, mostly very kind of kind. Actually, I've started a blog, and there hasn't been one Sydney Anglican who's been aggressive or dismissive. Or Michael Jensen, who's the son of the current Archbishop, we're often dialoguing.
He met his future wife in this church.
Yeah, I understand. So, and he's committed to dialogue. So, no, I did write an open letter asking for a more loving, humble, and open diocese. Got 330 odd replies, all of them supportive, from archdeacons to former archbishops to senior ministers to junior ministers to lay people, and that story's told there with the discussion around it. So no.
Now, when I first came across you recently, I saw an article that you'd put in the Sydney Morning Herald, and that was encouraging, if not challenging, the Christian church to rethink views on homosexuality. You gave the example of how, just as science has challenged us to rethink how we view, say, the creation stories, so you think some modern research on understanding of homosexuality is a reason for us to rethink that. So that's obviously a current topic.
Yeah, it's a current topic. I'm thinking of doing a couple of sermons on the issue at the church where I go, and put that up on the blog. So, maybe if you're interested in the blog, you can
and again,
pick those up a bit later.
There's been a shift in your
thinking?
It's
definitely been a shift. I mean, I've seen it during the time that I was at Moore College. Things changed quite radically. From a position where people believed that if you were homosexual, you were immoral simply for being homosexual, and over time, it's the people's understanding of homosexuality has changed to the point where it's now generally acknowledged within Christian circles everywhere that homosexuality is an orientation towards your same gender. Like if you're erotically and romantically attracted to someone of your own gender. And so I think the current position of most Sydney Anglicans, who are known to be very conservative, is that the Bible says no to homosexual practice, but doesn't condemn someone simply because that's the way they are by orientation. And so, I'm often engaging in conversation with Andrew Cameron, who's the ethicist at Moore College, and he laments the fact that a lot of Christian literature is quite kind of almost angry and dismissive, and actually not very helpful in terms of, if you like, taking a pastoral approach to those people who find themselves, for whatever reason, to be kind of oriented in that direction. And his view is that just as a single heterosexual person should abstain from sex for biblical reasons, and others, a homosexual person, even if they are erotically and romantically attracted to a person of their own gender, should remain abstinent. And that I think is the current position. So, and it kind of raises the issue for me, why so? And it says, well, go back and have a look at those biblical texts. What do they say? Why are they saying it? And do we need to rethink it? So that the Sydney Morning Herald article was just saying we do need to take account of emerging scientific evidence on this issue, and our ethics and our theology may need to take that into account. Now, that's controversial. So a few people have said you shouldn't have put that in your book, Keith. I mean, people are going to dismiss your book because you even discussed that. But I thought, no, I'm not going to not put it in my book, because I actually think the church has been terribly guilty of mistreatment of gay and lesbian people over the time, and leading to higher rates of suicide and whatnot. So we owe it to our gay and lesbian brothers and sisters to at least understand why they are the way they are, and then come up with a response which we think is Christian.
What have you found helpful in I mean, we've mentioned two issues where you've changed position on women in ministry, ordination, and homosexuality. Do you have some sort of a grid or a model that you find helpful in approaching something that might challenge currently held views? Yeah,
well, I think that it's interesting, if you go back and have a look at the way Jesus and the apostles read their scriptures, they all, almost always read and understood their scriptures in the light of their present experience. So the New Testament writers encountered Jesus in his divinity and world-shattering character, life and death and resurrection, and then they went back to the scriptures and reread their scriptures in the light of their current experience, and that's always been the case. So if you go through Jewish history, the Jewish theologians did exactly the same. they reread, reappropriated, sometimes took a Greek version of the scriptures rather than a Hebrew because it suited their purposes better. So they were more interested in what the scriptures meant for now than what they might have meant. We go back and say, we want to find out what the original writer meant at the time, come to a conclusion about what they meant, and what they meant is what counts forever. That Jesus and the apostles used their scriptures much more dynamically. They saw the scriptures in a much more dynamic model, and so they interpreted their scriptures in the light of their present experience. And I think, in a way, that kind of releases us, I think. So I talk about that. I talk about that in the book. We assume that the way we read and understand Scripture is just the way, the only way. But in actual fact, Jesus and the apostles didn't use our method.
I'd like to open up to questions in a moment, but if we just come back to, I guess, the title of your book, A Restless Faith. So this is sounds like an ongoing process where you, in a sense, can't settle.
I think I say, can you read? I haven't got my glasses, but the very first paragraph of chapter 10, because I think that's just the first paragraph. Sorry, I can't read it because I haven't got my glasses. Chapter 10.
I thought you'd be able to quote.
No.
Chapter 9. It's in
Chapter 10 is chronological, yeah. That 10's after 9.
Yeah, it's a long. Chapter 9's long. So where to from here? The first paragraph.
Yeah.
This is a reading of Keith Mascord's book, The Restless Faith. He'd do it himself, but you come. As I look back over the years of my life thus far, I do with a sense of gratitude and wonderment. If it weren't for my son's casual question about whether I'd write another book, which was at the beginning of the book, I doubt whether I would even have thought about embarking on this project, especially since my life story is still some way off being completed. Hopefully I'm still in good health, still playing touch rugby, which we've corrected to touch football. This is for an American audience, touch rugby. I still have much to learn and all sorts of new discoveries to make. The ocean of knowledge. There's a picture up there that I was going to point to and I lost the place. The picture of the ocean of knowledge, even of self-knowledge, seems to grow larger and deeper with time, harder to plumb, but I've never been more content. I've never been more restful. What restlessness remains is the restlessness of not yet being the person I would like to be. It is the restlessness of imperfection and limitation, not just of knowledge, but of love, integrity and devotion. So I could have just read your book out tonight, different parts of it.
That should do, really, shouldn't it? Yeah. And I'm more content than ever. And I think part of the reason for that is, although I'm still a questioner and I still have lots of questions, I'm happy not to know. I'm happy to kind of get on with the business of Christian life and faith and love and I'm restless by nature. You probably pick it in the body language. And maybe I'll never not be restless, but in terms of faith, the journey's not over. I'm not dead. I'm waiting to get to heaven and for me to tell Dad he was wrong and I was right, and then for him to do the same for me.
Well, our audience might have some questions. I just asked you to keep them brief and keep them as questions to Keith. So who would like to ask a question?
What do you think of the issue where society, in a post-Christian society, church institutions are shrinking or under threat, and society's moved on, and a lot of Christians within a Christian institution are getting involved in debates about things, and they're lumbering forward in a very slow way. And the rest of society says, well, look, you can have your debates, but you're getting further and further behind, and we've just moved on. And the stuff you're talking about, you can have your cups of coffee behind closed doors, but it's just not relevant to us anymore.
Yeah, and I think that's true. I think that unfortunately is very true. In a lot of ways, society has left us for dead. And I think the society's left us for dead in positive ways too. So with the gay issue, you may disagree, but what is it that society is guided by? They're guided by a sense of fairness and a sense of compassion. They're guided by a sense of fairness and compassion. Now those are Christian, we ought to be saying, we're about fairness, we're about compassion, you know what I mean? So the society, whether you agree with me or disagree, So society is kind of, is if you like, out-Christianing the Christians. Do you know what I mean? In terms of its embracement and saying, well, of course, why these people love each other, why cannot they be married? You know what I mean? So the church says, no, they can't be married. They're not male and female. They can't get married. So the church gets whether that might be the right thing to do. And Peter Jensen is so courageous really to go on Q&A and take a very unpopular line. Peter might be right. He might be right. And if he's right, then he's courageous to go against the flow. And don't we need to go against the flow anyway? But it is interesting that the church is seen as yesterday's reality, and does it need to on all of these issues? I don't think it needs to on patriarchy. So in terms of patriarchy, is the man has authority over the woman. That's what patriarchy is. So the woman submits to the man's authority because the man has authority. If you read the scriptures, are the scriptures saying patriarchy is forever, or are the scriptures regulating an existing custom? In other words, bringing the love and grace of Christ into a patriarchal world. I think patriarchy is dead. I think the gospel destroys it. I've never ever, even when I was patriarchal, even when I believed that I had authority over my wife and she had, basically she had to submit to my authority, I never once in 36 years of marriage told her to do something. Never had to. It's irrelevant. Patriarchy's dead in most Christian marriages that are dominated by Christian love. It's dead. So I think society has said, patriarchy, submission, that's the Middle Ages. I'm showing my colours, but I'm saying I think the church is sometimes its own worst enemy.
Any other questions?
Keith, you've subtitled your book Leaving Fundamentalism. I wonder if you'd just tell us a little bit about fundamentalism, both its history, what it is now, why you think it's important to leave it, and indeed even something about fundamentalism in other faiths.
Sure.
And then we'll continue with the second part of your subtitle.
Okay, yeah, sure. Fundamentalism as a word emerged in the US in the early 1900s as a response to critical biblical scholarship, much of it coming out of Germany, where North American Christians, many of them quite academically high-powered, asked the question, if you boil Christian faith down to its basics, what would be non-negotiable? So it's a really very fair question. You're like, what does it mean to be a Christian? What are the fundamental beliefs? And they came up with 5 at least: the inspiration, the inerrancy of Scripture, the penal substitutionary atonement, the deity of Christ, the resurrection, second coming. So they came up with a list of core beliefs. Fundamentalism as a movement was essentially a defensive movement against what they perceived as critical studies that were calling into questions things like Noah's flood, for example, that features in the book. But over time it degenerated into sectarianism as people outdid each other and adding other fundamentals and to actually outdo each other in being more fully biblical than their neighbours down the road, and also in some of its forms became quite what's called obscurantist, in other words, anti-intellectual. So because it was intellectual objections to the faith that were causing the trouble, they said, well, forget about the academy, we're going to believe the Bible. If the Bible says it, it's true. So the typical stereotype these days of a fundamentalist is, well, if the Bible says it, God says it. If God says it, it's true. It doesn't matter what your scientists say, full stop. So the fundamentalism so my nurturing was in North American style fundamentalism. So Prairie Bible Institute was a fundamentalist college, with a set of beliefs that are included in a doctrinal statement at the beginning of the book. Why leave fundamentalism? I think because certain aspects of that heritage I no longer think are sustainable. So, for example, the early chapters of Genesis I don't think can be read as factual. But then that's the short answer. I think also religion on the defensive can become angry and combative and also protective. And so there are elements within the Anglican Church that I think were fundamentalistic, but not fundamentalist. Yeah. How's that go?
So was leaving fundamentalism the thing that you felt you had to do in order to pursue God? Is there an alternative to the leaving of fundamentalism?
I think I needed to leave it, but the book is dedicated to my mum and dad, who were fundamentalists till their death. So, their Christian faith, their love for Jesus, their love for God, they've bequeathed to me in a powerful way. Some of their beliefs I don't share.
You use the term in the book reconfiguring your faith. I'm wondering if that fits in as a response to, you're not leaving the Christian faith, you're reconfiguring what you think is a...
Yeah, I think fundamentalism in a lot of ways is a very modern movement. I think there are a couple of mistakes the church has made in the Reformation. Restricting the only sense that really matters to the literal sense becomes a problem, I think. And also, the early church in their defensive mode came up with the doctrine of inerrancy, that there's no errors in the Bible. I don't think that's true. And I probably, I don't know how many present or former Moore College lecturers would probably not think. Michael Jensen asked his father, he's probably the best theologian at Moore College at the moment, he asked his father at a recent School of Theology, he didn't say Dad, but he could have said, Dad, isn't it time we jettison inerrancy? I don't think inerrancy works. So that inerrancy is a fundamental of fundamentalism. So in that sense, yes, it does need to be left behind, I think.
Any other questions?
I've got one.
Yeah.
Yeah. We've heard a lot about particular views that are pertinent to culture and Christianity, where they're intersecting at the moment. I was just wondering if briefly you could touch on your opinion or your conception of to what degree the church or Christianity should project itself or protect itself from culture, especially in view of these debates. And you're saying your views have changed. Has your conception of how the church or the Christianity should relate to these issues and culture, has that changed?
Well, maybe not. I think Jesus was the best critiquer of culture, wasn't he? He was the best. He was astoundingly perceptive of cultural trends within his own milieu, and was a fierce critic of the religious culture, religious and secular culture, and he had things to say to Herod, he had things to say to the Sadducees, he had things to say to the Pharisees, he had things to say to everyone. So if the church loses its prophetic edge, it's lost its Christ-likeness in a way. So we'll always be critical of culture, I think. We'll always need to be. But I guess we need to decide what battles to fight. When Copernicus came along, Calvin and Luther described him as an upstart astronomer. Well, he kind of proved them wrong. Do you know what I mean? And so I guess you just need wisdom. You know, if the church has lost its saltiness, it's lost its way. You know what I mean? So it's kind of, you know, people could say, "Oh, Keith, you're just following cultural trends." I don't think so. But that'd be dangerous. If I was, it'd be a fair critique, and if I was guilty of it, it'd be a serious fault, I think.
Andrew?
Yeah, Keith, I can relate to some of the journey of leaving fundamentalism. I grew up in Pentecostal churches in Greater Queensland, and something that I'm finding now is connecting with people that are still there. If you like.
Yeah.
So if you leave fundamentalism, you leave people behind as well. So just wondering, if you could share how you find, in some ways, explaining yourself to those.
Yeah, that's a really good question. My three siblings haven't moved.
Right.
My three siblings have not moved. My brother Alan lives in the States. He is a really strong Republican. If I was in America, I'd be a really strong Democrat. And he goes to a very conservative church. And I love him to death, but we can't talk politics. He wants to talk politics. He so wants to talk politics. I do not want to talk politics.
Particularly in an election year.
No. He's a very wealthy man. He drives a Corvette convertible. So I want to go on a road trip across the US with my brother, but we won't talk politics. Otherwise, I'd be walking. I think my sister lives in Calgary. She goes to a conservative, fundamentalistic church. Although she really helped because she read my chapters and she said, I'm a fundamentalist, but I'm not angry. You know what I mean? Like, you're not. So it was really helpful because I read, she read those early chapters and said, Keith, that you're not, your mum and dad were fundamentalists. We're fundamentalists. Be fair. So, and my younger sister is married to a Presbyterian minister, and they tend towards creation science. You know what I mean? So. And to the belief that the world is young. So it's a really pertinent question to ask me. And my parents, the book's dedicated to my parents, whose views are different to mine. I think the only thing there's two things. One, what I've tried to do, and if you do actually buy the book is appreciative and respectful and gentle all the way through. You know what I mean? And so that's the first thing. The second thing is, say let's just go to Noah's flood. What if there wasn't a universal flood and people keep believing in a universal flood? Then actually they're not believing what's true. And if they're not believing what's true, I would say as Christians we want to be committed to what's true. Do you know what I mean? So I put things in there because I think even if people disagree with me, they need to think about these things. And my siblings and I are fine. I think they still think I'm kind of strayed a bit too far. But we love each other, and the fact that someone who they love thinks this radical idea that Noah's flood didn't happen as described, I think, maybe Keith's got a point. Do you know what I mean? Suddenly someone you love and respect has a position, then you think about it. Again, doesn't matter if I'm not trying to convert them out of their beliefs. I don't feel they need to. They are wonderful Christians. But they don't have to change their beliefs. But the church needs to make sure it's committed to the truth. Needs to be committed to the truth. And we don't always know what the truth is. And on the women's issue, we don't, it's an issue of exegesis. How do you understand those passages? How is Paul using Genesis? Is he using it illustratively, or is he creating a creation pattern? There's two options.
I'm just very interested to understand what you mean by truth. Because you're talking about truth, but then you're saying you're moving away from that notion of truth and leaving fundamentalism because your understanding has changed.
The truth. What's the truth? Well,
I'm not sure about this truth thing.
Well, what is?
Do we need to have this? We're all believing something that's true, apart from the fact that God is true and His love for us is true.
Oh, that's enough.
We need to love each other.
That's enough.
Is that enough?
I reckon it's enough. Yeah, I reckon it's enough. But say for instance, you're a biblical archaeologist. Do you know who discovered that the flood wasn't universal? Christian geologists. Most of the early geologists were Christian clergymen. They had a Bible in one hand and pick and shovel in the other. It was they who discovered that Noah's flood. So they were going to look at the geological record to confirm their understanding of the Bible. And after however many years, they said no. Okay. So what they did then was go back and understand the story differently. Do you know what I mean? So it's learning, it's growing, it's understanding. What is true? Truth is what is true. True proposition. Noah's flood was universal. True or false? But it's either true or it's not true. That's what I mean by truth. You know, it's either true or it's not true.
I don't see it, but I don't see truth.
No, you don't see truth that way.
No.
Okay.
Because I don't think that we have to struggle with truth. I don't struggle with truth.
Okay.
Because
I do.
it's like, does God love me? Is that true? I don't need to struggle with that.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I do.
So it's I know what to
But I
say.
think we can only understand what is true from what we have, what the information we have at that moment,
Yeah.
and we can't be blamed for thinking.
Yeah.
Like people before these geologists came and did that, so they wouldn't have known.
No.
So how? And I don't think we have to worry about
I agree.
not having the truth if we don't have the information.
I agree. I think that's why I'm so content. I don't. Sometimes I just think, I don't know what is the best way to understand X, Y, and Z. But I don't care. I'm a father. I'm a grandfather. I'm heavily involved in my church, and I do a wonderfully rewarding job. I don't need to know. Don't need to know. I agree with you.
I can see what's happening, and I'm going to wrap it up here.
Everyone's going to sleep?
No, not at all. But I think what we've done and what your book does, Keith, it's a conversation. It's an ongoing thing. We get that from the image, and even within a family unit here, we're going to have some discussions late at night here in their household. So I think what you've done tonight is to help us think perhaps some new things and openness to some things. And as you say, I don't think it's necessarily agreeing or disagreeing, but being part of a journey that hopefully will move us along the line in our faith. So a restless faith is highly commended. And Keith Mascord, thank you very much for joining us tonight on Contentment.